And this week on Craig's Gun Channel, we're going to cover the Glock 17. This is a Gen 5. Just picked it up a couple weeks ago, so we're going to go ahead and take some shots and see how it does. Welcome to Craig's Gun Channel. Today we're covering the Glock 17. In the early 80s, the Austrian Armed Forces submitted a request for a new service pistol to replace their aging inventory of World War II era Walther P38s. They released a lengthy list of requirements, which included that it be self-loading, use NATO standard 9x19 ammo, and be secure from accidental discharge from shock, strike, and drop from a height of 2 meters onto a steel plate. It must survive a 15,000 round series without undue wear, and then be able to survive an overpressured round test. The Glock's company founder, engineer Gaston Glock, heard of the request for a new firearm, and even though neither he nor his company had any prior firearms manufacturing experience, set about developing a pistol to submit. Glock assembled a team of Europe's leading handgun experts from military, police, and civilian sport shooting to define the most desirable characteristics in a combat pistol. Within 3 months, he had developed a prototype which combined proven mechanisms and traits from previous pistol designs, and it made use of synthetic materials and modern manufacturing technologies, things that Glock was familiar with. Several samples of their design, designated the Glock 17, as it was the 17th patent procured by the company, were submitted for evaluation assessment trials in early 1982. After the rigorous evaluation process, the Glock 17 was announced the winner, defeating 8 other pistols from brands such as HK, FN, SIG, and Beretta. The pistol did so well in the trials that it was also accepted into service with the Norwegian and Swedish armed forces and became a standard NATO classification sidearm. By 1992, some 350,000 pistols had been sold in more than 45 countries. The Glock 17 is a 9mm short recoil operated, locked breech semi-automatic pistol. It's striker fired, and it half cocks the striker when the slide is charged, and when the trigger is pulled, the striker is fully cocked and at the end of its travel is released to fire the cartridge. The frame is made from a high-strength nylon-based polymer that Glock states has increased durability and is more resilient than carbon steel and most steel alloys. It's resistant to shock, caustic liquids, and temperature extremes, and it features 4 molded-in hardened steel guide rails for the slide. The barrel and slide are treated with a proprietary process characterized by extreme resistance to wear and corrosion. It penetrates the metal, and treated parts are resistant to salt water corrosion, making it particularly suitable for individuals carrying the pistol concealed, as the finish allows the pistol to better endure the effects of perspiration. Glock states that their steel parts using this treatment are more corrosion resistant than other finishes or treatments, including Teflon, bluing, hard chrome plating, or phosphates. It utilizes a double stack magazine that has a 17-round capacity. An optional floor plate allows for 19 rounds, and also available are 33-round high-capacity magazines as well as drum magazines of 50 rounds or more. The magazines are made of steel and are overmolded with plastic. Since its creation, it's had 5 generational changes. In the late 80s, the addition of checkering on the front strap and serrations to the back strap created an informal second generation. Evolving changes included the addition of a steel serial number plate to satisfy American ATF requirements, and in 1991, an integrated recoil spring assembly replaced the original 2-piece recoil spring and tube design. In 1998, the frame was modified by adding an accessory rail, thumb rests on both sides of the frame, and finger grooves on the front strap, creating the 3rd generation. Later changes to this generation also featured a modified extractor that also served as a loaded chamber indicator. An enlarged locking block, and an extra crosspin was added to aid in distribution of bolt forces. In 2010, the Glock released the 4th generation, now dubbed Gen 4 by Glock itself. Updates centered on ergonomics and the recoil spring assembly. The grip size was slightly reduced and featured a modified rough textured frame, grip checkering, and interchangeable back straps of different sizes. Also added was the ability to change the magazine release for left-handed use. In 2017, Glock released the Gen 5. The revision centered again on ergonomics as well as improving reliability. The changes included ambidextrous slide stop levers, a new finish for the barrel and slide, and the barrel itself featured a deeper recessed crown and revised polygonal rifling called the Glock Marksman barrel. The finger grooves were removed on the grip, and a flared magazine well was added. Redesigned magazine floor plates featured a frontward protruding lip to offer grip for manual-assisted extraction, and the magazine follower became orange-colored for easier visual identification. Glock pistols are designed with 3 independent safety mechanisms to prevent accidental discharge. The system, designated Safe Action by Glock, consists of an external integrated trigger safety and 2 automatic internal safeties, a firing pin safety and a drop safety. The 3 safety mechanisms are automatically disengaged one after the other when the trigger is squeezed, and are automatically reactivated when the trigger is released. This passive safety system omits a traditional manual safety as found on many other handgun designs. And this ability to fire immediately without worrying about an external safety is one feature Glock has stressed as an advantage when selling its guns, especially to police departments. This example is a 5th generation Glock 17. Let's take a closer look. As is always the case, we'll do a quick safety check. Go ahead and take a look. The magazine itself is empty. And as we can see, the chamber area is free and clear. So we're safe to start looking at the design, control, and features of the Glock 17. This is the Gen 5 version. First, we'll go ahead and take a look at some of the basics. We have the magazine release here. It is able to be switched over to be able to be operated from the other side. So it's not a fully ambidextrous magazine release. However, it can be switched around for right hand or left hand use. It operates typical fashion. You would just simply push down on it, and that releases the magazine. You have the slide lock here, and on the last round, the magazine has a little shelf right there, which engages that assembly, and the slide itself, there's a notch right there. On the last round, as the slide comes back, the magazine will push that lever up and it locks the slide back. To release, you would simply pull down, you can be on either side, and that would release it. It can also be operated manually if the magazine were not in it. You would simply pull back and lift up, and that'll lock it back as well. The trigger, it's a single action trigger, but it operates kind of like a double action. It's a striker fired firearm. Pulling the trigger pulls the striker back to cock it and then releases it and fires it. So it operates kind of like a double action, but it is a striker fired. Some additional features into this. The Glock has what they call the Safe Action trigger system. In their words, it's a revolutionary safe action trigger system, and it provides a consistent trigger pull from the first to the last round. There's 3 automatic independent operating safeties built into the fire control system of the pistol. All of the safeties disengage sequentially as the trigger is pulled and automatically re-engage when the trigger is released. Its safe, simple, and fast system allows users to concentrate fully on tactical tasks, particularly while under stress. Of course, there's a lot of sales pitch in that. However, there is a lot of engineering that went into this. The first is the trigger safety itself. If you notice that little blade there that's in the trigger, it's a safety lever incorporated into the trigger, and when the trigger is in the forward position, it blocks the trigger from moving rearward. And if you notice, if you just try pulling back the trigger, it actually blocks it. And I don't know if you can see, there's a little section right there. It actually hits the frame, and it will not, let's see if we can do this where you can see it, it won't allow the trigger to be pulled. So that little blade there, the trigger safety, has to be fully depressed at the same time as the trigger to be able to fire the pistol. And this also is incorporated as an inertial safety as well. It's on there in case something, of course, catches, but if the firearm were dropped on its back, for example, dropped onto a hard surface like this, the trigger, in this case, they're a polymer trigger, so it's unlikely it would happen anyway, but with some firearms, and it's conceivably possible even, with something as light as these triggers, the weight of the trigger itself on that impact could cause the trigger to fall down far enough to fire the weapon. Well, in this case, that blade would stop that from happening. There's a firing pin safety internally, which we'll take a look at that in a moment, and it mechanically blocks the firing pin from moving forward in the ready-to-fire condition. As the trigger's pulled rearward, the trigger bar pushes the firing pin safety up and disengages that, so that when the trigger is pulled back all the way and the striker is released, the firing pin can go all the way forward to fire the weapon. There's also a drop safety. The trigger bar internally rests on the safety ramp within the trigger mechanism housing, and the trigger bar engages the rear portion of the firing pin and prevents the firing pin from moving forward. As the trigger is pulled, the rearward trigger bar lowers down the safety ramp and allows release of the firing pin. So there's multiple redundant safeties in here meant to make this a safe firearm. So we'll go ahead and take a look at some of that here in a moment. First, we'll go ahead and take a look at disassembly. Now, since it is a striker-fired design at the end of the day, you have to first release that sear from the striker assembly to be able to remove the slide. And you do that by simply pulling the trigger to release that. Now, we've already checked this, but it's just a good habit. Go ahead and check to make sure your firearm is empty, because you are going to be pulling the trigger. Once you verify it's empty, you would simply pull the trigger back. And if you notice, the trigger stays back on a Glock. That's all part of the whole safety mechanism. Here, I'll go ahead and show you that real quick. That would, when you pull the trigger to fire the weapon, the firearm would fire, and of course the slide would come back. And as the slide comes forward, that last bit of travel resets the trigger for the next shot. So anyway, we'll go ahead and release that sear engagement. Those are the takedown levers right there. There's one on each side, and you just pull down on both of those. You need to pull the slide back slightly just to release the spring pressure off the disassembly catch. So just pull back the slide slightly, push in on those, down on those levers, and then the slide can come forward and off the frame. The frame itself is a polymer frame with steel inserts in critical places. For example, it's got steel rails that are cast integral to the polymer of the frame. So they're all one, it's all one piece. So it is a polymer frame, but you've got steel surfaces for the slide to ride on. You've got steel in the various engagement parts. Of course, the fire control system is steel. You have the ejector right there. This little section right here is part of that safety assembly. This is what disengages the firing pin and the striker safeties. There's our disconnector right there. It's kind of hard to see. There's so many bits and pieces in there. This little piece right here, when the slide comes back, it pushes in on that to disengage the trigger from the striker assembly and the sear. This is the sear right here. And when you pull the trigger, the sear pulls back to pull back the striker, and then falls down, and that's what would release it to fire. And part of that safety mechanism is all built into this so that it won't be able to go down unless the trigger is actually pulled back. And then this is the disconnector, so that after it fires the first round, it disconnects the trigger from the sear assembly so that it is just ready to fire for the next shot for a semi-automatic. Unless you're doing some repair work on this is as far as you would want to disassemble this. Basically, you want to clean everything off, get a light coating of oil for corrosion prevention and for smooth operation. The Glock is kind of like the AR-15 of the pistol world. It's customizable with all kinds of things. They make enhanced triggers, enhanced, disconnectors, and all kinds of things for it. I would urge you that the Gen 5, they've incorporated so many enhancements and features from the various models before it and from user input. The trigger's really nice right out of the box. So I would urge you to go ahead and shoot it and see if you like it first. You want to shoot several hundred rounds through it anyway to get a good feel of it for it, and also to allow it to break in, get all the surfaces nice and smooth. As they're used more, any little burrs from manufacturing get smoothed out, and then it just makes it a smoother operating firearm. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with the trigger just out of the box. So that's the frame. The slide itself, it's an all-metal slide, and of course you have the rails that would need to be cleaned. This is their dual stage or dual springed recoil mitigation system. It's basically a captive recoil spring. It's dual spring to help absorb that recoil, and there again the intent is to absorb as much recoil with the springs as possible so that there's less recoil transmitted to the shooter. It is captive, so to remove it you would just simply push forward on that rear plunger and lift up. So forward and up, and then that can be removed. Then that leaves the barrel, which is in the slide, and it's in the locked position. The squared off section into the squared recesses of the frame is what locks it solidly in place when it fires. Once it fires, there's the little ramp in there, and basically as the slide goes back, it would cause the barrel to drop, and then that would unlock it. So really you just have to lift the barrel out. You'd want to clean the barrel inside and out, make sure that the feed ramp is clear, and that's pretty much it with that. On the slide itself, want to clean the rail engagement surfaces, just wipe everything out, clean the bolt face, or the face right there. And this little button here is part of that safety for the firing pin, and basically, and if you can see, the firing pin's actually protruding a little bit right there. When you actually would fire the weapon, as the slide goes back, it would disengage that, and then that would drop down. This is what's pushed in by that trigger bar, that section right there, and this keeps the firing pin from being able to come forward. This is the striker and firing pin. This is what the sear catches on, that little section right here. And it is free floated for a little bit of travel. If you see it moves back and forth there a little bit, but it can only go forward that far. And if you see, notice it doesn't protrude from the chamber face there. To be able to actually fire, that has to be pushed in right there. So if you push that in, then the firing pin can go all the way forward to fire the weapon. So it's just part of the additional safety mechanism. There's the extractor there. It's an external extractor. The spring for it is a plunger spring that travels inside the slide all the way back, and it would come out there. There's the cover plate. The cover plate holds in that plunger and spring for the extractor. It also holds in the spring and the firing pin itself on the striker assembly. There's no reason to take this apart any further unless you were needing to replace components. It is easily serviceable. If you do need to take it apart, there's that little section right here, and you have the whole notch there in the slide. You have the little section right there, and that's a little plastic part, and you would push that forward, and then the spring pushes on that, and the same spring that drives the firing pin also pushes back against that plastic part, which pushes against the rear cover plate, which holds it in place. So you just need to push forward on that, and then the cover plate will come off. Now you have to also remember you have that other plunger spring in there, so you'd want to kind of cover it up a little bit. But to remove it, you'd simply just push forward on that, and then once you push forward, that'll slide off, and you can remove your striker assembly and firing pin. Here's the plunger and spring for the extractor. The extractor itself, now that the spring pressure's off, will come out. This safety also engages the extractor, so then that comes out, and it has a little spring also right there. And this is now fully disassembled. There's nothing else to remove on here. And then so you could go ahead and clean everything out. Then reassembly, if you notice the hole here, there's a flat section on this side, and then it's more rounded there. And this has a flat section here, and then it's more rounded here. So it only goes in one way. So you're not going to put it in the wrong way unless you really hammered it in, and you'd probably notice if you were doing that. So you put that in the recess, and then push it down. Once you push that down, there's the little round section right here. That goes into, there's a little hole. Right in there. So that goes in just like that. Then you put in your striker assembly, and now the firing pin and striker, actually everything's interlocked in there, so it all stays in place. Then put in your plunger and spring. Now this little round plastic piece right there, that's what we were pushing in on against that spring pressure, and as you can see there, it's sprung. You have to push in on that, and that engages in this really slight recess on the back of that cover plate, and that's what locks this in place. So to put it back in, you would just engage it in this little slot, and the little slots there. There's a little groove there, which goes into the matching grooves right there on the slide. So once you put that in place, you push in on that plunger until you can slide that in. Then slide it up to where you get to that plunger, then push it in with something. It's helpful to have a little tool. And then slide it all together. Now that is under spring tension, so if at any point in there you kind of slip, those parts can kind of go flying. So you want to, kind of keep track of, don't do this out on the lawn. It'd be hard to find the parts in the grass. As long as you're indoors, you shouldn't have any real problem, even if it gets away from you. So that's pretty much the full disassembly on the slide. So go ahead and put the barrel back in. It just goes through the upper hole and just drops into place like that. The front plunger button goes into the front. The little metal rear section goes into the saddle. The saddle, see if you can point it out here. It's a little hemispherical drop down right there. So you would just push forward and then down all the way into that section. Then you simply line up the rails right there. Now, since they're not full rails, you just put it on kind of like so, about here, and then simply slide it back. And it's in place. Then do a function check and hold the trigger down, and then come back with the slide, go forward, and make sure that the trigger resets. And we're reassembled. On my first trip to the range with it, I was happy overall in its performance. I had no feeding issues, and recoil was mild. I'm still getting used to it, having been a Beretta 92 convert prior to obtaining this one. However, overall, I'm pleased with its overall accuracy. I'll be shooting this pistol a lot over the next several months, and I have some accessorizing planned for it, so stay tuned to see further development. I hope that this information has been of value to you, and if you like this kind of content, please subscribe and hit the notify button to receive notifications as I release new content. And as always, until next time, stay safe.